Hey gang, the last time we left Joseph, he was in a pickle. He went to check on his brothers and they sold him as a slave. How terrible is that? Well, that's pretty terrible. So the people that they sold Joseph to took him to Egypt, a land far away from Joseph's home. And he was sold to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was a very powerful man. He was a captain of the guard. And Joseph became a servant in his household. Now, the Bible tells us that Joseph was very nice looking. He was very strong. But more important than that, the Bible says that Joseph was a man after God's heart and that God blessed him and everything that Joseph did prospered. Now, Joseph was in Egypt. He was far away from home. Nobody knew him. He didn't have to do right anymore. No way. He could do whatever he wanted to do. But he chose to do right. And because he chose to do right, God blessed him. And everyone around him saw that. And so Potiphar saw that everything he asked Joseph to do got better. So Potiphar gave him more and more responsibility until the Bible tells us that Potiphar didn't think about anything except eating because Joseph took care of it all. And Joseph did a great job. Now, that's all good, but he was still away from home. He was away from his brothers. He was away from his father. So it was still hard for him. But God blessed him. Wouldn't you want to think that if we were somewhere that nobody knew us, we would still do right? And God would bless us? And people would say, the hand of God is on that man's life. The Egyptians didn't even believe in God, but they saw there was a difference in Joseph. Boy, that's being a pilot. He was being a great pilot. So Joseph was running Potiphar's house, everything about Potiphar's house. But Potiphar's wife was not a nice lady. And she wanted Joseph to do something wrong. And she kept asking Joseph to do something wrong, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. He said, your husband is my master, and he has given me charge of everything in his household except you, because you're his wife. And he's charged me to be in charge, and I will not sin against him or God. But that wasn't enough. And this lady kept coming after him. And finally, one day, Joseph came into the house to do his duties, and for some weird reason, nobody else was in the house except for Potiphar's wife. And she tried to tempt him again to do something wrong. And Joseph said no, and he ran out of the house. Now, that's a wise choice. When someone was trying to get him to do something wrong, he didn't just say, I don't think so, maybe not. He didn't say talk, he just ran the other way. But when he ran the other way, he dropped his coat. And so Potiphar's wife used Joseph's coat to falsely accuse him. And she yelled and yelled and yelled and said, look, this servant that you brought in our house is trying to get me to do something wrong, and I wouldn't do it. But here's his coat to prove that what I say is true. So she told everyone in the house. So when Potiphar came home, she told Potiphar. And Potiphar was hurt, and he was mad, and he was mad at Joseph. And he had Joseph thrown in prison. Did Joseph deserve to be thrown in prison? No way. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had done right. But sometimes doing right is the hard thing to do. So Joseph has been sold into slavery, didn't do anything wrong, got sold into slavery. Now again, he didn't do anything wrong, and he got put in prison. Well, in prison, guess what? The same thing happened. Joseph was so good and so helpful and so honored and was obedient to God that God blessed him. And the person in charge of the prison saw that everything Joseph did was blessed by God. So just like Potiphar, he gave everything to Joseph because Joseph was so good at it. And all he had to do was eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And Joseph did all the work, and God blessed him. Well, two royal servants were thrown into prison, the cupbearer and the baker. The cupbearer is the man who would bring the cup to Pharaoh, and he would drink it first to make sure it wasn't poisoned, because sometimes people would try to kill the Pharaoh or kill the king. And then there was the baker who baked all the bread and made a lot of food for Pharaoh and his household. They were thrown into prison, and Joseph was in charge of them and took care of them. Well, one night they had dreams. Remember, Joseph had two dreams. So Joseph understands that what dreams are, that they can come from God. They woke up the next morning and they were upset and troubled. Joseph could tell. Good friends can tell when something's wrong. And he said, "Why are you troubled? Why are you upset? Can I help you?" He said, "Well, we had terrible dreams and we don't know what they mean." And now listen to what Joseph said to them. He said, "God interprets all dreams." Joseph could have said, "I know how to do that. I could probably do that." He probably could have, and he could have prayed and asked God to help him, and he could have told him, taken all the credit. But Joseph didn't take credit from the beginning. He said, "Tell me your dreams, and we'll see what God says." So the cupbearer told him his dream. He said, "I dreamed there were 3 grapevines, and as soon as they had flowers, they came into full grapes," which is like, boom, in presto, magic chingo. And he said, "Then I squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup, and I took the cup to Pharaoh." He goes, "What does that mean?" And God told Joseph to tell him that in the 3 vines equal 3 days. Say 1, 2, 3. 3 days. And in 3 days' time, you will be restored to your position in the palace. And you will be forgiven of whatever you were accused of. And just like Joseph said, that happened. We'll talk about that in a minute. Well, then the baker, because he liked what Joseph told the cupbearer, said, "Well, let me tell you my dream." He said, I was walking and there were 3 baskets of food on my head, and they were full of bread and baked goods, and the crows came and ate them all. What does that mean? Well, Joseph was kind of sad in his spirit because his dream wasn't a good dream. And he said, the 3 baskets equal 3 days, and in 3 days you'll be punished and cast out. And the baker wasn't happy at all. Well, would you be happy if that's what Joseph told you? But Joseph didn't say it. He was just he was just the messenger. God had given him the dreams. And so in 3 days, just like Joseph said, they came and took the baker, and he was punished and he was put out. And then they came for the cupbearer, and he was forgiven and restored. And Joseph said a very important thing. He said, when you're restored and put back into your place, remember me. Because Joseph had been in prison for a long time. And Joseph didn't deserve to be in prison. He had done nothing wrong. He was sold. He'd done nothing wrong. He was thrown into prison. He'd done nothing wrong. He was falsely accused both times. When we do something wrong, we get in trouble, that's okay. It's not okay, but we deserve it, right? But when we haven't done anything wrong and then we get in trouble, well, that's no good. That's hard. But sometimes that happens when we do right, because people will accuse us and we don't deserve to be accused. But here's my I don't want to say favorite, but probably the most difficult part of the story. Because when Joseph asked that cupbearer to remember him to Pharaoh when he was restored, he promised he would. But the Bible tells us that he forgot Joseph for a whole year. Can you imagine that? A whole year Joseph waits for someone to try to help him. But the cupbearer forgot about the good thing that Joseph did for him. So we want to make sure that we do right even when it's hard. We want to make sure that we remember to share the gospel. We want to make sure that we are being good friends to those around us. Tomorrow we'll find out what else happened in Joseph's life.